So with our learnings, like Tol mentioned, we have lots of learnings in R1 and R2. I think we had a lot of traction as well in understanding the process. I'm going to first go through this, like what led to this diagram quickly. So SIG1 was supposed to present user stories, and we would just give our user stories to SIG2, and we didn't have a very effective model of communication. Over time, we learned that our user stories have to be in a specific format, thanks to community members who actually helped us with establishing a template that would be well understood by SIG2. And as we create those user stories, we also came up with a model on how those user stories could be further refined and how the SIG1 and SIG2 can actually come together in helping find the relative priorities of these user stories and how do we arrive at the next release. So we formed that group, RX Planning and Scope, and we merged that on Friday meetings, and that meetings are actually going very well, in which we choose the candidate user stories, we share that with the SIG automation. SIG automation gives their feedback based on how well that user story can be implemented, that is short term versus requires more work. We formed that special group and we continue to evolve that. Now, one of the things that we would like to continue discussing is how do we decide on the scope of the next release? It is basically an iterative process, and we also had a lot of discussions that the release cadence is every 6 months, but in reality, we are working as an agile team. We are constantly working on user stories. Every working group is producing the user stories. We are constantly sharing that. And SIG automation is, with its efficiencies, constantly delivering that. But every 6 months mark, wherever we are with our implementation or deployment, we basically give it a theme and we do all the press releases. But essentially, we are not working as a waterfall group. We are very agile and incremental how we are working between the SIGs and how we will be continually working together. So this was a flow on how do we do the handover from SIG1 to SIG2 and how do we continuously work together. So Bala, did you make this flow? So I can go through that and maybe we'll have more questions. We can also get you here on stage. So for the initial user story, the section below is fully owned by SIG1. The initial draft user story discussion in the appropriate working group leads, they do the work, they produce the user story in the given template. We define the artifacts and then we present the user story in the RX scope working group, which is the work group on Friday. And that working group is that meeting is basically with SIG1 and SIG2 together. So we present that. And from that time onwards, SIG2 starts to look into those qualified, successful user stories and they break them down and they take it to their Git board, and the SIG2 discussions happen on the effort estimate of how these user stories will be implemented and what's that. So basically this next part is owned by SIG2, and that is ongoingly going to the SIG3 as well for testing and development in the release. So one thing that is very successful right now, and I think when Tol was showing the teams, there is a collaboration of SIG1 and SIG2 with the user story so that we don't do the handoff actually, but there is basically ongoing discussion with the design owner of the user story as well as the people who are implementing. So a section of that is owned by both SIG1 and SIG2. With that, we are in a very effective model of how to drive the roadmap, how to write the user stories, and how to implement them. But one thing that we are still working with and we are struggling with is basically how do we define the scope for the next release. It's not set in stone. Like I said, we are working in a very agile way. And I think with this, we also wanted to get to the R3 scope and planning discussion, and we should decide within this community. And of course, working with Tol and the other people from the SIG automation can actually come on stage and join me and talk a little bit about what is it that we can accomplish for R3. And we need to make it a discussion with this group. How do we prioritize the user stories for R3? And of course, Alexi and I will be continuously working towards R4 and beyond within our RX scope and planning group. So should we move on to the R3 scope? Yeah.
Any questions so far about the process? Any of you have an idea that you want to bring to Nephio? Okay, I'm going to sit and I'm going to wait. No ideas? Really? I have at least one. Silva, right? I'll work on it. All right, so let's if you don't have ideas, that's fine. We have a bunch of ideas. Yeah. Let me do this. Sorry, just a second. you want me to get, okay, I'm gonna get started. All right, so you're now the first to see what we're planning on doing for the next release that is planned in two months, right? So you're gonna see we're very optimistic. So we came up with a theme. We don't know if that's the right theme yet, but we believe that R3 is going to be about strengthening the platform and getting starting for ORAN. Are we getting starting for ORAN, or do we start implementing ORAN? A little bit of a debate. But anyway, that's just the theme. So before going straight into the various GitHub board, here are it's 6, but the 6th one is there. Here are the various top priorities that we have for Nephio. And it's arguably organized in priority order. So the first thing is the Nephio core platform. Nephio has been there about 2 years, and the core platform has been so far so good, right? But there are a couple of challenges that we have that you'll hear a little bit later today. So we want to enhance the platform. We want to make Nephio work also on real bare metal environments. So you can take that in your lab and you can deploy it in your labs. Nephio right now, of course, we need to test in an area that is repeatable, that we can plug in a CI. So it's a sandbox environment and self-contained. We've proven during the summit, during the One Summit a couple of sessions ago, that it's doable on bare metal. So we want to create a bit that recipe and ensure that it's repeatable by the community members. Security improvement, of course, and we'll have a whole talk about security a little bit later today. And we have Rahul in the room that is leading our security SIGs. So the first thing is really enhancing the platform, right? That's priority number 1 for Nephio. The second thing is about supporting third parties. Have you heard about config sync? Show of hand quickly. Yeah, well, have you heard about Argo and Flux? And everybody's showing their hands. So that's my point. We want to ensure that, Nephio right now, one-to-one with config sync, one-to-one with Porch, KPT. So we've made, because we needed when we started, design and technology decisions to get started. Now is a time where we want to step back a little bit and look at how we can make this technology more pluggable. Because if I have an investment in my corporation where GitOps is Flux, then I should be able to leverage it. So that's a little bit what we want to look at as part of that second point. The third one is really about infrastructure management, right? So I think that ties in very well with the discussion we heard earlier today. Thank you, Federico, about Silva. One of the main swim lane of Nephio is to manage LCM of infrastructure. We've been very heavily focused on creation of clusters right now with the use case of ORAN. So think about FOCOM in the ORAN architecture, talking to IMS, creating that cluster request, okay? But that's the standard aspect. How do you implement under the hood? That's where maybe some collaboration with Silva could happen. We could delegate the cluster creation to maybe a Silva release unit. So more to come, but there's definitely a lot of discussion happening in these areas. ORAN. So I mentioned FOCOM, I mentioned IMS. You need to know there is also NFO, DMS. And for now, we only care about O2, okay? O1 is going to come later down the road. We start discussing about O1. If you've seen the talk from Wim, Nokia, Cloud Native Yang, I'm thrilled and excited. Bringing Yang in a declarative manner in Kubernetes, first-class citizen. I've been dreaming about that for 10 years. Well, yeah, 10 years. But the ORAN use cases are more about how we can manage and reconfigure, lifecycle management of network functions. So we'll see how much we're going to be able to accomplish. But this is where there's a lot of work happening cross communities. Open Air Interface Software Alliance, ORAN SE. Any members from ORAN SE in the room? Thank you for being here. So we're collaborating with ORAN SE on the SMO side, more specifically, and maybe the IMS side as well. So we want to reuse some of the components you have, not reinvent everything. Seshu from ORAN SE is the main liaison, I would say, at this point. But I'm glad to see more of you as well with us. So that's a little bit the intention. User experience, top priority. Maybe we're repeating a bit ourselves. how can a vendor onboard their network function into Nephio? I think this is key for Nephio adoptions. So that's where it's going to happen. And finally, service assurance. So look, we're going to do all of that in the next 2 months. I see a couple of smiles. Come on, guys. Of course, we're not going to do everything. But now is the discussion that I want to open. We need to identify, and that's a little bit where the GitHub board comes into play. Bala, maybe if you want to join us a little bit to talk about the GitHub board. And the intention in the next 10 minutes is to discuss a little bit about the actual deliverables and what we're expecting. And eventually, after that, identify who will be willing to contribute to these deliverables. And I'm stuck talking about delivery and he's running away. Oh my God. That's the struggle of open source. But no, let's get it real. So you heard about the teams earlier this morning, and the GitHub board is organized that way. Maybe you want to get us a little bit through that, Bala, and we will focus on identifying the task that we can do in the next 2 months, right? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alexei. I mean, I think most of it has already been spoken by either Alexei, Sana, or Tal at this point of time. So if you see, there's a lot of synergy between how the SIG1 groups are organized and the SIG2 groups are organized. And accordingly, it's a SIG delisting, we organize the board in similar fashion. You can go all issues, or you can go to individual boards here to see the issues corresponding to that particular swim lane or epic. So we have core platform, we have ORAN and STK. STK is nothing but onboarding. And also it contains some of the modeling aspects as well. And then service assurance, security, test infra. Test infra is more about release processes, CI/CD infrastructure, test automation, etc. And also obviously the documentation. So, but if you see here, there are a lot of issues. That's one of the things that we need to discuss today is when R3 should need to be released, and then what is going to be the scope of it. I think probably we will discuss that, and based on which I think we need to adjust these boards. I think these are very optimistic and very aggressively created boards, which has all the wish list that we originally planned for R3 with all these different swim lanes. I think that's one of the things we need to discuss today. If it is really going to be 2 months from now, then we need to figure out what is the real practical aspects, and we need to prioritize. Alexei has explained in terms of priority, the core platform is definitely stabilizing the core platform and showcasing some of the use cases such as real bare metal clusters, supporting other GitHub systems are definitely one of the important things that we need to do in addition to ORAN. But that's something we need to discuss, Alexei. I think what's the date that we need to release R3, and then accordingly we need to scope this down. Yeah. Yeah, that's also a question. Do we need to? Yeah, I think do we also need to know whether we need to do a R3 in July or directly go to December release? Yeah, that's also. Yeah, we need to discuss that. I think Alexei has an item in the agenda to discuss this exact thing. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was just checking the time. We still have 25 minutes on the topic, so we're gonna get some stuff out of this.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Bala. Before jumping straight on the whether or not we should do a release in June, I don't want to get too controversial just yet. I want to explain as well. So these are the top 6 priorities in which we're gonna have some work items done in R3. So right now, I want to. By show of hand in the room, who is working on the Nephio core platform? No, 2 people? All right, 3 people. All right, guys. I know for the core platform, we're going to have a whole discussion dedicated this afternoon, right? But if there is any people in the room that are really eager to get more involved in Nephio, I think the core platform is an area where we need a lot of focus. So if you want to join us, this is where we need the most help, I will say, to get started, because that's the foundation of Nephio. I'm trying to be a little bit of a marketing here. Huh? People, please come and join. Now on the other point I want to convey before I jump more into the details is we've been talking about documentation, and I think that's a good feedback we heard this morning, right? As part of the SIG1, so it's less code delivery, it's more document delivery. We want to commit to have an architecture, which you started seeing a bit of it, a schema registry, likewise, a roadmap that we're building, not yet there, user story, sequence diagram. I haven't talked about it. I'll get there in a minute. And then high-level process description, so the user journey, what it means for a user that starts getting into Nephio. And I think that's a little bit the comment we heard this morning about day 0, day 1, day 2. What's that journey as an operator that they'll go through when they get into Nephio? So we don't have that yet, but we definitely want to go there. And finally, eventually a positioning paper, right, on what GenAI means for Nephio. Modeling APIs, basically. It's just a registry of all the models that we have into Nephio. The question was, what is schema registry? It might not be the right terminology, but it's more, yeah, schema catalog. And schema catalog. Hang on. Hey, this is a working session, by the way, so I'll take notes as we speak. But yeah, no, so we do have some catalog that you saw, right? A little bit earlier today. And there is enhancements that we want to do. So model and API, you can see here. Well, as we're talking, the PR was merged, and all of a sudden it's a new doc. That's how agile we are. Thank you, team. Yeah, thank you. That's pretty amazing. So the catalog is here, and I think there is an intention of, in the model and API, as you can see, show different kind of a category for the models. Karen talked a little bit about it. I think we have two, like package orchestration API, towards the network API. So we want to enhance that documentation. I think this is the comment as part of what we want to achieve in that release scope.
Takes an engineer.
All right. Okay, so we're committing ourselves, right, to provide you that very clear documentation, and that will be part of R3, whenever it's R3. So let me take you through a little bit. We explained to you this morning how, well, let me step back. Who understands a little bit better how Nephio works? Like for the newcomers and the people, even from the Nephio community. Is it a bit better, clear? Okay, great. So I'm trying to keep the energy up here. All right, so look, we leveraged that process the last, I would say, 6 months or 5 to 6 months, right? To come up with a bunch of work items. So all these priorities are not out of thin air. There is a bunch of work items that all the various working groups in SIG1, all the various teams in SIG2 has came up with. And so here, and I'm not going through them one by one, but in that same planning doc that you can have access to is the detail of all the various user stories, whether it's for the security, and we're going to go through today, so I'm not going to spoil it, whether it's for ORAN, and you can see a lot of user stories happening in ORAN, whether it's for the service assurance, where we start, beefing up a bit our understanding of what we want to accomplish there, and then user and modeling. It is key that we keep building the momentum on how we're defining these requirements, because we want Nephio to be use case driven, right? I talked that the platform is probably the highest priority in the next couple of months. It is to sustain all the use cases that we have. And we already have a very good idea of what are these use cases. I've just shown you the list, like maybe we have 10 of them. So that's a little bit the approach we're taking in Nephio. Any question on all of that, all that massive list that I'm just scrolling through? Yes, please. Hang on, I'll bring you the mic.
Thanks. Yeah, so I've just got a question. So I'm a cybersecurity researcher, but I guess one of your points, let me see if I can get my notes. The service assurance, initial observability. So this is a lot of this framework is new to me. I was curious. So the SE-RAN project that had a lot of I think nice components such as the MobiFlow, auditor, data collection, telemetry. So what I'm really curious about is getting telemetry, KPIs, performance measurements, like all this data upstream, and then actionable for various algorithms from a cybersecurity perspective. What's the kind of, I don't know, the view on that kind of more broadly?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I think there is really two swim lanes, right? As part of that question. One is infrastructure aspect. So how can we get the KPI from the infra? And then the other one is the network function. So in all-RAN architecture, network function KPIs come from the O1 interface, right? This is where all the management of the network function itself is happening from the SMO standpoint. We don't have yet, actually, you know what? Let's have our security chair.
Yeah.
answer.
So let me touch upon, because you mentioned about 2 points, right? SE-RAN project. But right now in Nephio, there is no relation as such, but eventually there might be some components which might make sense in the context of Nephio as well. You're talking about MobiFlow Auditor. And basically, personally, I'm involved in that project as well. So eventually you might see, but there are certain foundational elements that are getting built right now. Yeah. It's RAN focused, but but the current foundational elements do not distinguish between RAN versus core. Those would be required in both the cases. So without those foundational elements, we can't really think about the next level use cases. That's the stage we are at right now from the security perspective. And we'll talk about more in the session.
Hang on.
Mics, please, so the people can hear you and the recording is captured.
I think is the answer to the question. Not we're starting to work on this observability framework, right? So in other words, in my view, that is the starting point on getting to the point that you need, right? For example, the SDC project that I presented for Yang, right? So any device that has Yang that also supports getting the state out of the system, which we then could, for example, we are adding a Prometheus, let's say, exporter in that. So that means that anything that has Yang or is supported by Yang, so that could be some infrastructure component like the networking side, but also network function that have Yang data models. So we could get information from there. And so I think one of the things the task force in SIG2 is towards service assurance, right? Which basically has the observability component inside. And we are looking, I think in that we are looking at using Prometheus at the first step. The challenge that we have right now in Nephio is that both the OAI as well as the free 5GC has very little information. So the team in observability, there is some people that are working on, for example, eBPF and trying to get information out of it without actually getting it from the network function. So we are trying to get some capabilities to get some information, which we then can do something with. But the first step is actually get that observability in place, and then we can support various use cases. But our goal, in essence, is try to get that framework in a generic way, such that we can get metrics from anything, like whether it's radio, whether it's core, whether it's infra. So we should be agnostic to the environment itself, right? And I think we need various components, because every system, like, so there will be things that are SNMP based, there will be people that are having a Yang based system, and so we'll have various components. So we need to build a flexible framework that is able to then get that information from these various resources. That's my take a little bit.
Thanks, Wim.
It was somebody else. I have a mic, so you don't.
Hang on.
We can have a mic off then, but no, I mean, my comment on observability really is we do need to have better observability of what Nephio itself is doing before we worry about the network, because just even being able to tell whether or not network functions or clusters are up and running or deployed is a dark art in itself. Yeah, exactly, basics.
Please go ahead.
Okay, my question was just wondering if it's from UX enhancement and Nephio core enhancement, if you will be tackling this, let's say, some other use cases. For now, I see only NF deploy. What if, let's say, for slicing use case, I want to terminate that NF?
Yeah, no, but that's a good, if you have the horsepower to bring that use case, I think this is what we're saying. We we express a little bit the process on how to bring use cases to Nephio,
Yeah.
and we need, you know, more.
Yeah, use cases like NF upgrade.
Yeah.
NF terminate.
Yeah. Well, so you're talking in a context, general context, right? Not in the context of ORAN.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking for
Yeah,
not
so
only ORAN, I mean, core and ORAN.
There is definitely a need within Nephio, right, to being able to support more the lifecycle management of the NF. We're not there yet. This is part of some of the roadmap that will come, but we haven't defined exactly all the requirements on how to do this.
This is good from slicing point or use case point of view.
It could be any kind of use case if you need to lifecycle manage that network function.
Okay.
But hang on, just before, I think your question, hang on, just a second. Your question was about the security or the service assurance?
I know. Hold on, can we get the mic in front of you?
Yeah, I'll take care of it. Yeah, sorry, we will get back to the topic of the life cycle. I think there's a couple of reds in.
I think it'd be important to kind of document and share how within the Nephio framework, the bigger box and then the smaller boxes, where data is generated and how it's moved and shared, so that there will be different consumers, like he mentioned, security consumer, there will be programmatic consumers and some other administrative stuff. So instead of defining in the beginning and hard coding that would be less flexible, I think you let it hang out, figure out how people consume it, but make it available that we collect this data. It's available here. You make use of it as however you like it. Over.
One more. Yeah. So I'll add one more note to this. I want to temper expectations a little bit, right? I mentioned even when we brought in the service assurance use case, it was very controversial. Service assurance, I mean, is huge. It goes all the way up to the level of BSS, all the way down to, electrical impulses. We agreed from the very start of Nephio, we want to run a tight ship, right? We don't want to increase the scope in a way that is unmanageable. You remember looking at the swim lanes, we don't have a swim lane for observability. We don't want to reinvent the wheels. We don't want to create a data moving platform or, we don't want to innovate in terms of observability. All of that stuff is there. And, if it's data and netconf, et cetera, that's not a route we want to take, but we want to participate in that narrative, right? I think the key part about Nephio, it's not looking to replace existing orchestration stories. It's not even called an orchestrator, right? It's participates in the systems that are already in place. I really think a lot of times in terms of blue field, right? It's not green field and it's not exactly brown field. We're integrating north, south, east, west with systems that already exist. All of you already have data collection systems, right? So the point here is not that we're going to try to reinvent or innovate something regarding observability. It's just making sure that we can participate in existing observability stories that are there. So yeah, just to keep it in mind, service assurance, we're part of the service assurance story, not all of it, right? And obviously we need to secure it. That's where you have a security SIG and making sure that we're doing things correctly. But I hope that we don't expand scope too much into something that's unmanageable for us. Right.
And exactly, and I would exactly add on that. So basically just by hearing and then the kind of observation is that I fully agree that this kind of roadmap needs to be, let's say from an open source project, needs to be created at the end. I think that's totally important. What I miss a bit is the mission statement, at least to me, about Nephio to really support that what you are trying to do, to say, okay, what is really that, what you as a community want to add and what you want to develop on, because at the end, the resources, I guess, are limited from a development point of view. And then adding all those nice kind of things which are partly not fulfilled in other communities as well, because the complexity is too high and at the end resources are missing. Just that's my observation, that it would help a lot if you define your mission statement for Nephio for R3 to not become that broad and then fail basically with everything. Just an observation.
No, this is very good feedback. And I tried starting there with what I call the team. We could call this a mission statement. It's not very clear. Sorry, I'm typing at the same time, taking your feedback. It's not very, look, you've seen right now we have a bunch of priorities. our community in terms of development is what it is. And so we're trying to identify where we can make some level of progress in R3. So we need a little bit to understand what we can deliver so we can come up with that mission statement for the next release. From a pure Nephio standpoint, my point of view is our goal is to bring a Kubernetes kind of operational model to the way we're managing networks. That's the highest level mission statement. Now, how that trickle down into R3, I don't know yet exactly. So that's a little bit the reaction, but I want to just wrap it up on the service assurance aspect as I was starting talking when the question came up. So there is two levels, infra and F. Our goal is going to be to supply some or integrate with some of the platform components that exist already out there, just make them part of Nephio, not reinvent the wheel. And then we'll see how these use cases are going to come to life, right? So we don't want to reinvent the whole game of service assurance and policies and all of that. We want to leverage what exists out there, but bring that disruptive approach that is all about KRM, Kubernetes resource actuation, and so on.
But I think the point that Tal and you made, I don't know your name, but is actually very valid in my view, is that I think service assurance and it's important, right? Now the question is it the problem that Nephio has to solve, right? And I think maybe is it enough that we basically say, here is how you use Nephio in such a framework and not do anything beyond that and say, here is how you can get information out and here's a bunch of systems and this is how you integrate, like the same thing as we would do with the orchestration layer, right? So we basically say, here's how you would integrate, and that's what we as Nephio do, right? Because I do agree, if you look to all that stuff, with the people that we have right now, I would question there's no way we can deliver all of that. So from that point of view, I think it's a fair point to say or to see within the team here, is it enough for Nephio to basically say, here is how you consume Nephio in a full closed loop system without Nephio actually taking care of it, but just documenting how it would be done. Yeah, who was first? I don't know.
Just a quick one. So one of the things in the service assurance that we are not looking at, and maybe I would want us to think about that as well. Everything that we're talking about the telco network functions, right? And the way the telco network functions are today, in the brownfield, coming from a service providers network where we have 70, 80 plus kind of network functions we have deployed in our clouds, and we are working with them. It's unfortunate for me to say that in the last 7+ years, we haven't done a real closed loop that has gone in production. And what are the challenges for that? There are much bigger challenges that are actually existing out there. So you're right, we are not reinventing the wheel by solving the service assurance problems. We just need to see what value can Nephio bring in terms of CRDs and operators, and following those principles, how can we deliver the most efficient closed loop possible, GitOps principles or Kubernetes principles. But maybe my fundamental question is take a step back and see how can we do this for the telco CNFs? Where is their data? The data is generally sometimes in the EMSs or sometimes in the other legacy systems that are still supporting SNMP based protocols. It's not coming in Prometheus. So kind of looking at the existing landscape or the brownfield and then trying to connect the dots to how will we actually do the first use case for the service assurance or closed loop. What I'm seeing is that Nephio is a extremely powerful concept and mechanism. And how do we get to use those principles for the existing brownfield of CNFs? And what is in between that will actually connect the two worlds is my worry.
Yeah. Last comment.
Yeah, we're running on time here.
Yeah, I'll just give you a very telco ORAN kind of perspective on this. So specifically, if you look at what's defined in the ORAN SMO, there is a service assurance SMO service. And so if you look at service assurance end-to-end overall for something like a ORAN at service, there are different aspects of it. Some parts of it is what I would think of as the cloud infrastructure resources used by a network function, and some aspects have nothing to do with that. It has to do with some fault in the network which needs to be corrected by some other means. So there will always, this is just my view, but I believe there will always be some entity having to worry about service assurance for an overall end-to-end telco type service. And so just a thought, Nephio doesn't have to solve all the problems, but focus on the part where the management and orchestration of the cloud resources become very important for the service assurance. So for example, if the service assurance has to do with you are running out of capacity for the DU, and because of that, there is having packet losses and latency issues. That's a classic thing. Somewhere there'll be a command saying, to have this SLAs and service assurance, we need to spin up more resources. On the other extreme example would be, there is a problem with service in the mobile network because of coverage issues. It's nothing to do with, in some sense, configuration or deployment of cloud resources. It has to do something with the radio layer.
Yeah, I'm going to react to this. Give me one moment. Yeah, thank you. No, that's a very good point. I'm also very involved in ORAN Working Group 6, by the way. And so we have many discussions on service assurance. And the way it's defined is there is various levels of closed loop, right? From SMO down to DNF as part of the O-Cloud, from within the O-Cloud, and then either from within the no-Cloud side closer to DNF itself. And so I think it's, yeah, good point. So point captured, and we'll make sure that, well, I don't know what we're going to make out of all this, but the idea is at least we're getting closer to a joint understanding of what we're going to do. Thank you, everyone, for the participation. I'm a bit energized right now. You know, I want to continue, but unfortunately, I have to hand it off because that's the end of this specific session. And I'd like to call on stage our dear Rani that will talk about Cloud Native CNF and testing program. Maybe you've heard a little bit about it. I'm not going to spoil it. Rani, floor is yours. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.